And Boris is outside the House of Commons at the moment. My job is to work with Rishi and everyone else in the Conservative government to do the best possible job on housing or on dealing with extremism.
Rich has got in touch. He says Michael Gove has a reputation as a doer in government. This feels like a big compliment and then something at the end of it, but it's not. He has experienced many days of turbulence during the 14 years of Conservative government. So when Rishi does eventually step down, will Michael put his name forward for leader?
No.
Why not? Why not?
I'm over the hill. So the next...
How old are you?
I think I can still help the government. I think I can still...
How old are you?
I am 56.
Okay, over the hill at 56.
Maybe a bit young for a Times Radio presenter, perhaps. But no, I hope Rishi stays as Prime Minister after the general election. I hope he stays as leader of the Conservative Party for as long as possible. By the time that he stands down, in the words of JFK, the torch will have passed to a new generation.
Speaking of that new generation, someone asked on Twitter, have you made up with Kemi Badenoch?
We're very good friends.
Would you support her to be the next leader?
There's no vacancy at the moment. But I supported her last time, so you can, that's pretty legit.
And you're friendly with her. There's no.
Oh yeah. No, it was reported that she was very annoyed with me. She was, but she had every right to be. But I am a.
Do you want to talk about what you did, or is that not?
I'm a huge fan of hers, and I think she's brilliant.
She's brilliant.
Oh God, was Nadeem Zahawi right to say that getting rid of Boris Johnson was wrong?
Well, actually, funny enough, I wrote about this for the Times just after, and I said that I regretted both the fact and the manner of Boris's departure. But in a way, I think all of us will have views about what happened then.
What's your view?
As I say, I regret the fact that he went, but I am an actor, not a commentator. I'm a politician at the moment, not a journalist, and so therefore it's my responsibility to do everything possible to make sure that the government works as effectively as possible. And Boris is outside the House of Commons at the moment. My job is to work with Rishi and everyone else in the Conservative government to do the best possible job on housing or on dealing with extremism. What I really want to do is to help the Conservatives to win the election. I think there are...
do you believe that?
Yes.
And if they don't, what will you do?
Be sad. But... the critical thing is I hope that I'll have the chance to come back, or whether it's on Times Radio or wherever, and make the case for why I believe the Conservatives deserve to win the election. And I've had the opportunity in the past to talk about what I think are some of the real gains that we've made in areas like education and welfare. But also, come the election, there'll be big questions about tax, about migration, and also about security, where I think that the Conservatives have the answers and the other guys don't.
Just having a conversation, actually, about the blood scandal.
Yes.
What do you make of the issue of institutional cover-up, institutional defensiveness? You're a veteran of many departments. How big a problem is it? How do we fix this problem, Michael, of institutional cover-ups that seem to go across the board in the British establishment?
Well, I think it's not unique to the British establishment, but you're absolutely right. There can sometimes be a tendency, and we see it at its most marked with the infected blood scandal, for institutions to be shy about... shy is one word, to be extremely reluctant to share the information necessary in order to ensure that they're properly held accountable. And we've seen it with the NHS in this case, but we can also see it in the case of the way in which the Grenfell tragedy occurred. The responsibility for dealing with that tragedy rests with my department. An inquiry will report in a month or so's time, and I strongly suspect that it will also point to institutional failures, and those institutional failures spring from a failure to ask really tough and difficult questions within organisations about performance and about purpose.
I mean, is that on you as well as a minister?
Yes.
Because you get lines to take. And
yes.
Lines to take are defensive lines. That's you try and survive an interview. And that's not often a great way of uncovering truth.
No, absolutely. And in politics, indeed in any endeavour, you have to operate as a team. In operating as a team, you don't want to be seen as hypercritical. You don't want to be seen as a pain. You don't want to be seen as the difficult, ornery figure who is always pointing the finger. But as we also know, for example, with the post office scandal, sometimes you do have to be difficult as a minister. It is your responsibility to ask questions which will be uncomfortable for others. And sometimes you have to ask daft laddie questions which could potentially expose you as looking a little bit stupid or a little bit naive. But you have to. And one of the dangers...
People don't.
No, one of the dangers in politics is that people don't want to appear as though they don't know what's going on. So they sometimes succumb to, the soothing words of experts, and it's easier to go along with it. And also in politics and in other organisations, there's a tendency to believe, look, if I tiptoe past this, then it will be someone else's responsibility, and I won't be in the firing line.
But that's not necessarily sustainable. We had lots of listeners' questions, haven't we, Asma, throughout the morning. Should we try and get to as many as we can? We haven't got that long, so should we try and go through them as quickly as we can?
Okay, so, where do we start even here? Shall we talk? We'll talk about housing, shall we? From Al. Have the Conservatives succeeded on housing in the last 5 years? For context, we have had 6 housing ministers in the last 2 years.
Yes, I think that the point about the churn of ministers is often made. The reality is delivery, but not at a level that we would want. So we're shortly going to be able to say that we've built 1 million homes in the course of this Parliament. That was one of the targets that we set ourselves. There was another target, which was 300,000 homes every year. That is not a target that we've met.
What about the leasehold situation? So many people have got in touch about that, actually, and they want to know why you haven't followed through on that. They're very suspicious about people in power who perhaps might be landlords, etc., kind of wielding influence. What would you say to those
I can
people?
understand why people are suspicious overall, because there are vested interests with deep pockets who've been arguing against change, and the change hasn't occurred at the speed that I would like, but it's coming. And we have a bill which will transform the situation for leaseholders, which is now in the House of Lords, and I think is going to make good progress, should be on the statute book, i.e. should be law before the general election, and that will dramatically change the balance of power between the freeholders, the landlords, and the leaseholders, people like, the listeners of Times Radio, who've bought flats in good faith, and then have found that far from it being an asset like other homes that increases in value over time, is an asset that diminishes in value. And that's wrong, and that will change.
I actually wrote this one down earlier, and I'm glad that it's appeared here. It comes from Phil. Do you realise how insulting it is when you and your colleagues dodge and deflect perfectly legitimate questions from the media? So they're not talking about the gotchas. They're talking about, well, whatever a legitimate question might be. This is from Phil, who's a very disillusioned 50-year-old unpaid carer from London. Is it difficult, Michael Gove, when you're on a government round, for example, and you're doing maybe, 5 or 6 interviews in the morning, and you know they're all going to ask you, and you've all got bits of paper. There's certain ministers who come on, we can hear the pages turning, and that's fine. We want them to be prepared. But how aware are you of how your words fall with listeners?
Very aware. And of course...
So you wouldn't repeat a line then, would you? If someone says this is the line to take, you won't keep doing it within the interview.
Sometimes it's the case that you're the minister responsible for a particular area. You're on, the big story is somewhere else. It's not necessarily an area where you have expertise, but there will be information that will have been shared with you that you can share with others, but you may not be able to go into greater depth. So I think Grant Shapps was on Times Radio on Sunday, being interviewed by Kate and by Adam Bolton. There were a couple of issues that were raised which were not in his wheelhouse, and he explained that, but he also explained as much as he knew. But yes, sometimes it's the case, often it's the case that politicians from all parties worry about where a line of questioning is going. They worry that they might, almost like a witness in the stand, incriminate themselves. So they are more circumspect than they should be.
Can I give you some advice to give your colleagues, if you don't mind, which is, and it comes from our listeners, which is when there's a phrase which is Labour don't have a plan or whatever it might be, don't say it more than twice in an interview, because it infuriates our listeners. I just want to feed that back to you. I've got a question from someone called Andrew Neil. I believe you know who Andrew Neil is. He's going to be a Times Radio presenter come September.
He's a promising young journalist from Paisley.
He is.
Birthday today, a young 75.
Yes, exactly. He says that if inflation going up wasn't the government's fault, it was external factors, why do you take credit for it when it comes down?
Well, it's both external factors and also the acts of the government and the Bank of England. So, yes, we all know that one of the factors that drove inflation up, but it went up more in some countries than in others. One of the factors was the outworking of COVID. The other one was obviously the war in Ukraine. Some countries have been better at handling inflation than others. One of the critical things is if you want to get inflation down, you've got to keep a tight rein on public spending.
Question about the ICC from Ella, and you want to talk about anti-Semitism later on today. What do you make of the ICC saying they're going to seek a warrant against Benjamin Netanyahu? Ella's concerned, the absurdity, she says, of equating Israel and Hamas. We just had the Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem on, very angry on the subject. Is the ICC entitled to seek a warrant against Benjamin Netanyahu?
Well, I think Ella is spot on. I mean, the ICC has its own processes. I'm not a lawyer, but the one thing that it seems to me to be absolutely clear is, well, of course you can criticise Israel, and there are plenty of grounds for doing so. You cannot equate Israel with Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organisation bent on slaughter. Israel is a state, like all states, an imperfect one, but trying to defend its people. So equating the two is just nonsensical.
But Israel, in doing that, might be committing war crimes.
Well, there is this drive, isn't there, to put Israel in the dock and to hold Israel to standards that we don't hold other countries to. There's a particular narrative that some are seeking to run at the moment, which is intended to hold Israel to higher standards than anyone else, double standards, and to delegitimize Israel for a host of reasons. That's one of the things that I'm touching on later. Yes, there are grounds to criticize Israel. Yes, there are very good grounds to hold Netanyahu to account for some of the mistakes that he has made. But where are the ICC in dealing with what happened in Syria, what's happening in Myanmar, what's happening in Sudan, what's happening in Mali, what's happening in Ethiopia? There are conflicts going on there. The person currently alive who's killed more Muslims than anyone else is Bashar al-Assad. So when the ICC go after him with the same energy they're going after Israel, then I'll feel reassured.